All right, everybody. Welcome back to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the headlines and the real dynamics behind them, what's changing, what it means, why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neal, good to see you, man. How you been?
Doing great, man. It's Thanksgiving week, so getting ready for Turkey Day, although, we don't do turkey anymore, but we can talk about that.
You don't
How
do
about you?
turkey?
I've given up.
Um,
I love ham, and two, it's so hard to get a turkey right. I tried so many years in a row, and my turkey game was just not good enough. It was always like too dry or too this or too that or whatever. And after all that effort, I was like, you know what? I can just go buy a ham, and everybody's still happy, and I'm less stressed. So
I mean,
we're getting a ham.
that's a pretty. I'm really proud of you, Neal. Like, that's a bold admission to realize that you're just not man enough to cook a turkey.
That's what it is. It's all about my manhood and my admitting that it's not enough. It's really just capitulation. I'm just too lazy to figure it out.
Yeah, no. I've always been the Thanksgiving cook in our house. My wife, when we first got married, she was, we didn't have kids. We would travel to go visit, our families, et cetera. And so when she was working, I would cook because she was working and I was off for Thanksgiving. And then when she wasn't working, we'd go travel. And so, my mother-in-law or my mother or somebody would cook, right? So I always made Thanksgiving when we were home, and it's kind of become my thing. And so, like, turkey has become my thing as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I should come to your house.
Pretty much, dude. Like, I mean, like, you had this right here and you just weren't even asking the right questions. So
I didn't know who to ask. Well, here's my worldwide APB. I need help on the turkey. I'm not sure. So what's your secret? Like, are you frying it? Are you?
No. People get really big into kind of the frying, and I think that's a little overdone.
Is that a pun or is that just?
I guess it was a rhyme, at least. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay.
I'm not a bit. First of all, like, do we really need to introduce all that? The thing that I think about is the big one. This is about flipping the turkey is an important part of that. So you start with it. Part of the trick of the whole thing is when you think about making a turkey is the fact that you don't want the breast meat to be overcooked at the same time that you want to make sure that the thigh and the dark meat gets cooked sufficiently, especially if you're doing a stuffing. Like, that can be really a trick associated with that. And so one of the things that I'll do is that I will we'll salt the turkey like a couple 3 days before, kind of a dry brine associated with that, and then I'll make sure to really lather it in butter. So there's that, and then you want to start the bird for the first like 2/3 of it. Frankly, you want it upside down, breast down. And so what ends up happening is a lot of the juices from the dark meat ends up dripping down into the white meat, and it actually makes it a lot more flavorful. If you have a stuffing, you need to make sure that you pull the stuffing out halfway through, just for food safety at a minimum, but also it helps to make sure some of those juices kind of get down there. I'm not a big stuffing inside the bird. I'm more of a dressing kind of guy. And then you want to flip it over. You want to be very careful to be paying attention to the temperatures that are happening in the breast meat and the thigh meat. And you need to kind of work it a little bit to make sure that they get there at the right time. But the breast meat, when you flip it over, a lot of times what I'll do is then I'll put some foil over the breast so it's not getting kind of the direct radiation to dry it out. And then, as the thigh meat's kind of coming up to temperature and I think, okay, I've got this all about right, I'll pull the foil off and I'll let the oven itself, kind of heat it. And then the skin really browns up nicely at that point. So there you go. That's Mike's secret to cooking a turkey.
You've worked on that for years. I can tell because you didn't prepare for this, and it's like it's right there. It's all about.
Yeah, no.
It's at the ready.
Roasting meat. Apparently, that's my entire family thinks that's imprinted upon the Y chromosome. Like, all the women in my family are like, big roast. That's Mike. Go do it. There's something about like the manliness of it. I guess I don't know.
Yeah. I look, I love doing tri-tip on the grill and all the other things. I just, on this holiday, maybe I'll get back to it. Maybe when I retire, I've got enough time to do what you just did, what you just went through. But yeah, for now, I think we're good with the ham.
Yeah, no worries. I've actually had it. If you, the other thing that you can do is if you get a heritage breed turkey, and I'm really nerding out here, they tend to have a
Mm.
different ratio. The breast meat is a little bit smaller. So if you actually
Oh,
use
wow.
butter
That's
there,
super detailed.
yeah, if you use butter
Okay.
associated with that, you'll actually make the breast greasy. Like it's like it gets
Wow.
that degree of moistness, right? And so like if you use a heritage breed, it's a little bit of a cheat code to a certain extent, because it's just
Mm.
a naturally moister bird, anyways.
Mm. Well, it sounds delicious.
Yeah, well, the flip of it is that in my family, we have Thanksgiving coming up, and we were originally expecting to have a couple more people that were coming to town, and then the plans changed, etc. So I have way too big of a turkey for what we have there. So I'm going to have one of the frustrations has always been is everyone's like they come over, they like the turkey, and then they all want leftovers for the turkey so they can have their turkey sandwiches, etc. And I'm just like, hey, what the hell? I did all the cooking here. I want the turkey sandwiches, and so this year I'm going to have turkey sandwiches at my ears.
Oh, good to go. All right. So how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Lindsay was working a good bit this weekend, but I got some like good dad time with the kids. We've been doing some like home projects, and like they're old enough now that like they actually are contributing, and they're understanding like the component of like working together as a family, like physically working. And even it's a backyard project. Um, but just the component of like out there working with your kids in the sun, it wasn't even all that nice of weather, but like just being outside and doing manual labor for some reason always puts me in a good mood.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to mind, body, spirit to that, right? I mean, get out into the world, get some sunshine. Actually, Huberman talks about that too. He was on some show a couple of months ago and he's just like, get up in the morning and go stare at the sun. Like,
I'm
don't burn your retinas, but stare like just off the sun. He didn't actually say stare at the sun, but I thought it was actually it seemed fairly extreme. Rather than just like just go outside and let the sun hit you. He was like, look as directly into the sun as you can.
I've
Seemed like that.
speaking of extreme, have you heard about the guys that will like tan their taint?
No, no, but I already know where this is going. Go ahead.
They apparently it's like a chunk of skin that doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight, and so there's like some people out there that like really take this, like your skin helps you create vitamin D. Like there's a huge health
Sure.
component for whole human beings for kind of getting
Yeah.
outside and enjoying the sunshine. And like these people have taken it to extreme, so they literally tan in their backyard with their legs up in the air and they're so there's that.
That seems like they probably have um few maybe extreme views on healthcare if they're doing that. Just guess.
I think it's a fair thing. Yeah, I don't know. I guess to each their own. If you enjoy putting your butthole up in the air for a suntan, do your thing. But
Yeah. I'm not judging. I mean, I don't know if I understand the argument. Like sometimes there's this argument that, like 100,000 years ago, humans needed this and therefore we're going to like the paleo diet. Right? But where's the argument for that? Like at what point in human history was the taint getting a lot of sun?
I don't know. Maybe it goes back to our simian ancestors. Maybe monkeys were butt tanning or something.
Ooh. There are some monkeys that walk around with their butts up in there. That's true.
Yeah. So there you go. Who knows? Either way, you will not find me in my backyard with my butthole up in the air. So you got that going for you.
No.
Um,
My neighbors can take a deep breath, a sigh of relief that they will not have to deal with it.
yeah, exactly. And my children. Um, so I don't think my wife would be too shocked because I've done weird shit in my life, I guess. But my kids, like I'm going to scare them.
But your kids aren't ready for that, man.
No,
like,
they are not
spare
ready.
them at least. Give them a couple of years.
Yeah. So no, life's good, man. Just a little time outside, and I've also been doing a lot more of this rucking sort of thing. So yeah, just getting up in the morning and going for a walk, taking the dog with me. It's I've fully entered in my old man phase where I really like watching the sunrise as I'm going out for a walk, and um, just again, it's something about like carrying a pack full of something heavy and walking, and hanging out with your dog and enjoying the sunshine, like the sunrise specifically. It just puts me in a good mood. So,
That's cool, man. That reminds me of when my little ones were little. The thing that always got them calmed down was when I put them in my little whatever that thing, tie them to the chest and go for a walk.
mhm.
There was something about that rhythmic walking, and like it stuck in my head. I don't know how true it is, but like this does go back 100,000 years, where like that was a safe place where you were walking away from danger, and like the baby knew that they were like close to their parent and on the move. That was a safe and comfortable place. I wonder if there's some psychological element to that for you too. Is that as a man you go out there carrying shit around, like you're going out on the hunt or whatever it is. You get up for an early morning hunt, and there's something triggered that gives you the right chemicals in your brain that makes you feel good.
It kind of ties into this larger question about like how do men fit into the world these days, and like there's this component that like I feel like a lot of what we do is trying to deny our evolutionary ancestry, and that there's you can push around certain things, right? And like a famous neurologist that I like to follow is a guy named Robert Sapolsky, and he one time taught this course about like how different there are for how men behave in London versus the United States, and they're all men, and they similar degrees of happiness, et cetera. And so like there's certain things you can control through kind of societal behaviors as far as like degrees of violence, et cetera. But there's other things that like it's just at our core, it's who we are. And when I look at like the degrees of unhappiness that we have, and like the male loneliness, epidemic, and a bunch of things there, like at its core is that I think civilization is essentially a series of compromises for us all to work together, and technological and social kind of innovations for us all to work together. But like at its core, like sometimes you have to kind of get back to the behaviors that are standard in tribal societies. And one of the things that tribal societies do is they have very strong bonds between men, and kind of the male side of things, and they have very strong bonds between women. And I think that there's an importance in like the kind of the family component of it, of like where we, it's important. I deeply love my wife and I want to spend a lot of time with her, and like I a lot of happiness around her. But like there's also this component of like, um, in like if you look at most tribal societies, the kind of the units of about a couple hundred people that are all relatively related to one another, is that the women tend to just through kind of the nature of like childcare, tended to stick relatively close to home, working together, on kind of communal group projects, and the men tended to go out in small bands and go do a thing. And I see this like as a father towards my son is about like how happy he was happy. Like we were having a good time moving a shovel, right? Like it's working outside. Like, moving a shovel is not fun work. But he was happy and a great work partner with me. And like I think there's this component of like just kind of the father son of like how do I teach him to, to work alongside, and that manual component of it. Um and then yeah, I think there's just this component of like as men, you just got human beings broadly, we got to move, but in particular, men, you got to carry something fucking heavy, and you got to go out and move your legs. And if you do that, you're probably going to be in a better shape, because that's what most men have done through all of human history. And human history is not the last 1,000 years; it's the last 2 million. You know, and so I just getting back to my kind of my simian, tribal, from the simian ancestry all the way up to like our tribal ancestry. Like that's what we're evolved for. And I think the more I can, you know, connect my body with that part of my ancestry, and then connect my mind with kind of the civilization side of it, like the happier I will be.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and at the same time, like I'm not doing a very good job of it. Like I think you build something into your daily routine, which is great. I think I've been missing it is probably the right description. Like I'll drive by on the freeway and I'll see a park, like that could be a destination to go hike in. And I'm like, man, I really miss that. It's been a long time. So I've like got this longing to go do it. And I just, it just hasn't risen to the top of the priority stack. Uh, Startup, CEO, dad, running around trying to, take care of my parents now. It's just not in the cards. But everything you just said resonates because it's for me a step further. It's like I got this longing to go do it. And I remember how good it felt to be on the trail, breathing the clean air and we're, huffing and puffing up a hill. I just miss all that stuff.
Yeah.
How to get back to it.
Well, the flip side, you could always just sun your butthole. So,
yeah, is that going to be the title of this episode?
sun your butthole. All right. How about we get into things? I guess that was a fairly serious conversation other than my glib little thing there, but, let's get down to the news, man. You want to talk about Chinese renewables? Specifically, 2024, steel and Chinese renewables apparently equaled 250 times what is in the Golden Gate Bridge. Generates 5 times more energy than the 600 nuclear power plants that are used in China right now. So, there's a lot of talk about like nuclear power, and that's like a lot of cool stuff that's happening there, but also just like the opportunity that's being missed associated with renewables. Where does your head go on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the same time a a challenge for capitalism to meet the moment of an infrastructure overhaul such as this, and also a statement about what it means for the government to own the means of production. And I think that is something that we'll talk about on a few different topics we've got teed up for today. Look, if you're a central planning committee in China and you look at the challenge that they have, look, not a lot of oil and gas. They import a lot of that, but they do have a vast geography that's pretty windy and pretty sunny. And so they sat down, probably 30 years ago now, and thought like, well, what are the base inputs? We need raw material production of X, Y, and Z. We needed some low cost manufacturing. We could use that PV power, that's solar power, to then build out more advanced manufacturing. And then you build it from the ground up. And if you do that, if there's like a central planning committee, you can come up with a pretty holistic plan, try to do things cheaply at scale. And that's where they are now, right? They're putting billions and billions of dollars into making the biggest wind turbines, the most efficient solar. There's a solar plant in China that's covers the size of the entirety of Manhattan. I mean, it is a massive solar plant. And meanwhile, the US is doing things like, talking about corporate social responsibility and debating carbon credits and trying to figure out if climate change is real. And, part of me is like, oh my gosh, man, I wish we could just be better at building stuff. And I guess the counter to that is, we have a democratic system where we debate things and we have lots of points of view that come forward. And so that's kind of where my head is right now. I'm like super envious that they're building and I should mention, by the way, they're still building coal plants. It's not like they've just abandoned fossil fuel. I mean, they're literally building coal plants and nuclear plants at the same time they're building solar and wind and other things. But in any case, I digress. I think the point is like on one point, I'm like super jealous that they're able to do this sort of central planning, very smart plan that deploys a ton of renewables in a really short period of time. And man, we're just over here fiddling around with our tax credits and debating climate change.
Yeah, I don't see the discussions about like first of all, corporate social responsibility. I think is a good thing, and I think that carbon markets are important, et cetera. But your larger point absolutely stands, which is the fact that we're over here having little kind of micro debates about shit that got settled like 30 years ago. Like, what the fuck are we doing? And it's just a distraction. And I don't think it's a problem with democracy. I think it's actually a problem of the fact that our country has moved away from democracy. Like, it's not super reflective of the will of the people. Um, and so I think that this is actually a symptom of the corruption of money in politics, to a certain extent, about like the fact that like the moneyed interests right now are in the standing, astride the actual social progress, and that if we were actually to kind of engage what the non-vocal majority is interested in this sort of stuff, we would actually have been working on this stuff for a long, long time. Um, but I think a little bit more about from like the strategic side of things about like, okay, as in, as an American patriot, which sometimes feels a little bit hard these days, but as an American patriot, like I want my country to win. And there's two things that I think that this is just foolish on from that viewpoint. One is the industries of the future. We've talked about that a lot before. Like, if you want an all the above energy policy, great. It actually should be all the above, and a big, big fucking component of that is going to be renewable energy. It can't be, we are electrifying. That is happening. We have a industry that is nascent and world leading, but also consumes a lot of electricity. And so that's going to happen with a lot of renewables. And so there's a component of like, how are we producing this energy? Who's going to be the ones that are manufacturing and installing it and doing all the things? And the U.S. is not only losing that, they're getting out of the game. And that is, at least the federal government is in attempting to do that. The economics of renewable energy are kind of overwhelming at this point. And so like, as it's the U.S. government is actually standing astride the potential, the needs of the population and the needs of industry and the needs, like they're getting in the fucking way. And so that's not a help. But the other thing that I think about from a strategic standpoint is um, and I shared an article with you about this one, Neal, is the idea of like the reason renewables are winning is because it's cheap. Like that's the cheapest energy you can buy in a lot of places. Not all the times, and I'm not going to use a blanket statement. And there's a lot that we have to do in distribution and right. But from a generation standpoint, it's about as cheap as you can get, and it's only getting cheaper. And so when you look at that, like if energy dominance helps you to to win the future, like you were going to do that on the back of cheap energy. And so if we're handicapping the ability of us to install cheap energy in order to continue to kind of make lives better for Americans, you're also undercutting the ability of not of just like the energy industry, but other industries. Like, how long can we stay ahead on the AI race if our electricity is more expensive than our competitors? Like, I've already talked to people that are in the manufacturing for chips space and within AI, and like they're talking like they're power plant people now. They're thinking about how can I get energy as affordably and as reliably as possible. So if we're undercutting like the reliability of the grid for those folks, like we are also sabotaging our future in practically every other industry and every other economic activity. Like we are eating our seed corn for the future in order to make a couple of people a little fatter right now while everybody else starves. And it's bad. It's not good for America.
Well, so to unpack, I think I'll go back to your money and politics, and maybe you need to explain a bit more. I think what you're saying is that it's sort of traditional oil and gas companies had undue influence, given that they were rich and powerful. They had undue influence over our political system, and therefore pulled some strings to kneecap wind, solar, other alternative sources of energy. Is that
In part, I don't know if I want to be as blanket as like it's oil and gas companies. They're definitely part of that, right? And we've talked about that before about like how they've funded like fraudulent activity and they're kind of getting away with it. Um, but there was a political paper that came out. God, it's been about a decade now. That showed that there was almost zero correlation between public support for a policy position and um, the likelihood of it being passed through Congress. And there was almost zero correlation. It was like 30%, like all the way across the board from 0 to practically 100% support. 30% of the time it got through. And there was an almost direct correlation in this paper between whether economic elites valued this or not. Which is to say, like, we've talked about this before, is like, I think humans are more hackable than we'd like to admit, broken down into party politics as much an ideology. And that gets hacked by people with money to kind of form political policy the way that they want. So I think that there's a component of that like just worries me about like the more money we have in politics, the more easy it is for that to happen, to be driven into ideologies. And part of that is oil and gas. Like people have cared, like the majority of the country, including actually the majority of Republicans, support action on climate change. Right? Like this isn't like even like that Democrat Republican sort of thing. Like the majority of Republicans support this. So like why haven't we had this happen? And I can't think of another reason.
Yeah, I mean, I just happens maybe some recency bias here, but I watched a film called The White House Effect recently, and it actually was about the George Bush administration, which is when the shift happened. Essentially, before Bush, it was Carter and Reagan and others had a pretty unified view that, look, it was in the 70s. It was Carl Sagan actually started talking. It was probably before him too, but at least I saw it was this like an interview on Johnny Carson. Carl Sagan was talking about CO2 and the greenhouse effect is what they called it back then. And, so this is not, I mean, we talk about it like it's a here and now issue, and it is, but it's been around for a while, right? I mean, that's like 50 years ago. We've been talking about the greenhouse effect. And anyway, the movie's storyline was essentially it was in the Bush 1, or George H.W. Bush administration, where it appeared that scientists started disagreeing. Before that time, there was pretty unanimous agreement that it was an issue, we had to confront it, et cetera. But it wasn't until, the late 80s, early 90s, when scientists on the other side, reputable scientists on the other side, started calling it into question. And the movie does a pretty good job of expressing that most of those other scientists, which were definitely in the minority, were funded in some way to have that alternative point of view. But it muddied the waters enough to where the public was confused. And they're like, oh, well, I've got people on both sides. And then if you boil it down, you're like, well, am I going to go with this harder thing? I mean, we need the limited government resources to go to the most important things. Do I need to fund this thing that's sort of not decided by science? And so they were able to generate just enough uncertainty, I think, that then it became, truly like a political football where people got, wedged into sides. But anyway, I thought it was pretty interesting that it wasn't until that administration that it became actually like a two sides issue.
Yeah. I mean, the science is crazy old. Like Eunice Newton first described this in like the middle of the 19th century. So like we're approaching a 200-year-old science. And you can, order the parts off of Amazon and replicate her experiments. And then Svante Arrhenius, who independently did it himself about 40 years later in about 1896, published a paper associated with it. So it's super repeatable science. Like it would be.
Well, but 1896, like how does that happen? Because it was CO2 didn't start getting released in large part until when?
So typically the dividing line that from a climate perspective people look at is the Industrial Revolution. That's when we started using the mass consumption of fossil fuels associated with that. So it was first being described, like the science of like how carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes warming was first described by Eunice Newton Foote in about 1856, and then Svante Arrhenius, unfamiliar with her paper, also he ended up winning a Nobel Prize for a separate thing in chemistry, so not a dummy. He first published his in 1896, so like we like this is a known physical property that if you increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is what's going to happen. We've known this.
That makes sense. that makes sense. I'm just asking, like, the Industrial Revolution didn't start until late 1800s, right?
Yeah, so it's about the same time that the Industrial Revolution was happening, is that we were seeing this sort of thing happening. Um, but scary factoid, which is that half of all of the emissions of all of humanity and for all time, have happened in the last 35 years. So you can think of like all the emissions of World War II, of the Rust Belt. All of that has happened in our lifetime. Half of all the emissions of all of humanity has happened in our lifetime. And so, yeah, there was an incentive to muddy the waters there. There was a lot of money that ended up being made because we didn't start decarbonizing a little bit earlier. And one of the things that's been shown actually is that like it actually wasn't tied to our prosperity at all. Energy is tied to our prosperity, but carbon is not. The U.S. has been decarbonizing for a few years, not by through intent, but just by happenstance to a certain extent. And we've never been wealthier. It's pretty lopsided. There's a lot of problems with where that wealth is, but like we are, from a carbon intensity standpoint, we're way wealthier than we ever were. China's decarbonizing on a per capita basis, which is something that's not kind of thought of very often. Like the connection between burning shit and wealth is not as strong as the oil or any fossil fuel company would like you to believe.
But that sounds like a great time, though, to start making more oil than you need. One of the other articles we teed up today was about the glut of 4 million barrels a day, based on the IEA, which is a international energy agency. I don't know. How do you what do you think about that? We got modest growth in terms of demand for oil, and yet oil production is accelerating.
There's since the 70s, people have been talking about peak oil, right? Which is the idea of like from the oil embargo and the kind of the shock there. And there was this thought that like there would come a time where we were producing more, we would no longer be able to produce any more oil. And then we'd have this almost potentially Malthusian sort of thing as people were like really scrambling for energy and. It was actually kind of part of like why Jimmy Carter was so big on like solar panels.
Right.
Small tangent. One of the things I love about Jimmy Carter is that things that are like central, like what it means to be like a dad now, is about making sure you turn off your light switch and don't burn the energy unnecessarily. Jimmy Carter got nagged by people of being like, oh, he's just a scold. Like, if I want to leave my lights on, what's the matter to Jimmy Carter or to the president or things like that? And it's now like central to kind of like almost like a male identity now. God, what was
It's totally true. I describe myself in that way. I'm basically like an old man who just walks around the house turning lights off.
It's every father in America is just walking around like turning off light switches and being like, kids, go.
Come on now.
Exactly. Economics worked, which is to say supply and demand, when the supplies, started feeling constraints around the kind of demand, the price went up. That fostered new innovations in order to be able to extract enough. And, we keep seeing new technologies in fossil fuels coming to the market to be able to bring more and more fossil fuels. And so we will never probably reach peak oil production. Like as far as like the technological capacity. Matter of fact, the world already has 3 times more proven fossil fuel reserves than they can afford to extract without burning the planet up. Like we have more than enough shit in the ground that we can extract to burn for energy than we will ever need, short of just like putting a gun to our metaphorical head and pulling the trigger. Like it would be suicidal to extract what we have. So what's interesting is there's been like more within the environmental community is this idea around peak demand. When is that going to happen? And are there things that we can do for that? And that's happening. One of the things I think like people don't really talk about as much because success is retreating from us on a climate perspective about as fast as we're achieving it. We're pretty close to peak
Mm-hmm.
demand now. And if you look at like the global emissions, like they go up, they go down a little bit. Some years it feels like really bad. But 10 years ago, if we'd been talking about like, hey, global emissions will peak in the next decade, you would have been like, fuck yeah, that's amazing. Um, but
Does that depend on what we assume for total population though? Because we're at like what, 9 now, and totals. I've seen different numbers on like what's sustainable for population.
um, so that's a little bit of a different question. One of my favorite factoids is so one of the fastest growing countries in the world is Nigeria from a population standpoint. Um, and From the Nigerian electric grid, the average Nigerian consumes about 1/10 the electricity in their entire lives as your refrigerator is consuming this year. Right? So, um, there's this report from Shell. It's about like 7-8 years old now, called the Sky Report, and it talked about like, okay, you're familiar. So it talked about like that there was like three axes that we had to pay attention to. There's growth of population, growth of the middle class, right? So as you grow into the middle class, I'm not in any position to tell a Nigerian they can't have a fridge, right? Like they humans deserve refrigeration, period. So, how do we get them energy without burning the planet up? And so there's been a lot of people talking about like sustainable development goals and a bunch of stuff from a policy perspective. But one of the reasons I got into startups is that I think, and you're here too, is the idea of that um, you have to give them better solutions, right? From an energy perspective. And one of the things that's starting to happen, they saw this in Africa with like telecoms. Like they just didn't build out like all the wired infrastructure that the Western societies did because cell phones existed. And so they created whole ecosystems about like banking via cell phone way before like, Americans were doing that because that was the constraint that they were operating under. Same sort of thing's starting to happen here, which is like, yes, there's some fossil fuels that are being installed there, but there's also a ton of renewables that are being put in there because there's plenty of sun in Africa. Why wouldn't you do that? And so you're starting to see kind of these microgrid systems rather that are working there. Anyways, peak demand, I think, is about here. And I think um, one of the hypotheses, now AI is a huge fucking curveball in here. One of the hypotheses I've always had is the idea of like the pressure moving forward is actually going to be on cheaper and cheaper energy, right? So if you're approaching peak demand on oil because we have electrification of all sorts of things that used to burn fossil fuels, cars and heat pumps and all that, right? Um, that means that you're going to have more demands of the electric grid. Well, when you have more demands of the electric grid, you're going to want to install more electricity generation capacity. Well, again, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, the cheapest electricity to produce is, thank you very much, renewables. And So how can you start to kind of pair up the grid in order to be like to generate that? Renewables, though, operate at economies of scale. If I have more consumption of oil, the price of oil goes up because there's a demand on a supply system that's able to generate that, right? And in the short to medium term, that's why we used to have a lot of these boom and bust cycles with the oil companies. But when you increase demand for renewables, it may go up a little bit in the short term, but in the long term, like you are only expanding the capacity of generate.
Scaling production.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the electricity gets permanently cheaper to produce, right? Which is a different sort of thing. And so you get into some of these feedback loops where now, if you're any like fossil fuel generated electricity, like they're having to compete against cheaper and cheaper and cheaper solar and wind.
Yeah.
That's not going to work, right? So like now you're only talking about like the cheapest fossil fuels. So there's a race to the bottom on like the commodity of energy, not just on the commodity of fossil fuels.
Yeah. And I mean, just to unpack the oil and gas side of it, if you think about how, if you tap the demand, that necessarily means that market is going to tighten and prices are going to go up. That price increase eventually leads to other exploration. Deep water drilling is the clearest example of that. When oil was really expensive, companies were incentivized to go do deep water drilling, which is really expensive, but it's okay if it's barrel of oil is 120. But if a barrel of oil is 50, you can't pay for all the deep sea drilling operations. So that's, anyway, to your point, it's um, and actually that also ties back to the peak oil question, challenge, whatever, is that like we assumed peak oil when we thought there was only one way to get the oil that was in the ground. But if if your price of a barrel of oil is double what it is today, then there are other technologies that could be used to pull that, additional sources of oil out of the ground. So anyway, all that's tied together. It just sort of makes your point about short versus long term.
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out that it's not like the IEA is like this, like contrary to like Americans and the fact that it's the International Energy Agency and therefore it must be, like a hate America, Wokistan sort of. I have no idea what the fuck people say about it, but like it's contrary to the international side of things. It's actually fairly beholden to the fossil fuels. Um,
Mm.
the IEA, it's actually fairly famous now within renewable energy circles. Is every single year for the last like 20 years has grossly underestimated the future of renewables. Every single year, like there's some great charts of like where like, okay, well, we're going to just extrapolate out this trend and it'll be kind of a linear. And they forget that actually these things don't operate on a linear behavior, but on an exponential behavior as like you add, more and more capacity for the system. And so the amount of solar energy that has been installed, like, is many, 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 many multiples of like what the IEA was projecting. And so they've been very like resistant to the idea. They've been very fossil fuel, like this is what's going to happen as the primary, and very anti-renewable for years.
I got a question though. How does that happen? How do you wrong? Because I know this too. If you're in the energy space, the IEA report is wrong every single year. How is it that they don't get smarter?
I think there's a money and politics component to it, right? Which is that they don't want to upset the fossil fuel industry to a certain extent. I don't know, man.
Be wrong 19 years in a row, but not 20. 19, I'm okay with. 20 years, you can't be wrong 20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a limit.
I don't know how like it. I don't get it. So yeah, the IAA is very conservative about this stuff, and I think it's because maybe they come from like the traditional fossil fuel based energy industry, which is that like you can extrapolate trends in kind of linear fashions out of that energy sphere, but renewables are tech, and as we all know, tech is exponential, and like maybe they just have a point absolutely well taken. Like after the first 10 years, they should have woken up by year 20, like they should be like getting beaten with their own report, like until they figure it out. But yeah, I think there's just something to think about there. Anyways.
Yeah. So that's one sign the apocalypse is upon us. The other is AI. And, Vinod Khosla took a pretty controversial position this week. I want to get your take on, which is he thinks that, there are going to be a lot of people put out of work from AI potentially. I don't take that as sort of a fait accompli, but I think there are many in that space that are convinced that once we get to artificial general intelligence, AGI, that lots of people are going to be put out of work. And so Vinod has this proposition, I guess it is, that, since the U.S. federal government took a 10% stake in Intel, that we should expand on that and do more of it and use the stake that the government takes to pay for some sort of universal basic income. You remember back when Yang was running for president, he had this UBI where everybody gets $1,000 a month, whether you work or not. It's just enough to pay for the basics, and what you do above and beyond that is up to you. What do you think?
My first reaction is I bet Neal hates this. So,
I tried to present it as
neutrally as you could.
unbiasedly as possible. I tried not to reveal my position.
um, I don't know, man. So I've got a lot of kind of complex thoughts that are kind of competing here, right? So, um, the first one is that humans have had all these labor saving devices, and Americans, at least in particular, seem to be working harder than ever. And so that wealth is accruing at the top. And we've designed a system where that happens, and we need to figure out something to do about that, right? We should be, you know, you want to keep like the degree of innovation of the American economy and the ability to build, but you also should like be able to kind of share the resources around enough where people can have better lives. And living in Europe, living in Japan when I was in the service, I saw that there are other ways that the world lives, and not, Japan's maybe not the best example because some of those salarymen were working crazy hours and like having long commutes and things like that. Um, but a lot of people in Europe had like pretty good lives, and they didn't have as much wealth, but their quality of life was better. And so, like, is there a way that we can share the resources around where people can be happy? And can be a little bit less stressed out. One of the things that I think it's something like if you're in the top quartile versus the bottom quartile of American earners here, your life expectancy is like 10 years longer, right? Like, people are dying for lack of healthcare and of stress, and like we're literally killing Americans for wealth. And so like I think about like how can we share those resources, and I kind of like the idea of like Yang and the universal basic income. Um, as an entrepreneur, I know a lot of people don't get into the game now because they can't afford to, because you know, and like a universal basic income is not talking about like a ton of wealth. It's just like something that would allow people to like get in the game and give it a try. Take a little break from their career. That is a risk. Not make a lot of money, but just enough so they can have some health care and some food. Like that would really be about like unleashing American talent to me. Um, but the flip of it is that, 10% of every company out there is, probably not enough. Like, that's still allowing 90% of the wealth to accrue to the top 1%, which is, so if we're, if you're thinking about kind of the socialism side of things, like, that's probably not the right balance, um, if you're going pro-socialist. The other problem and one of the biggest concerns that people have always had about like socialism in the United States is the centralization of power, right? And so, place in countries where you have good democratic institutions, like in Europe, where people actually have the ability to do that, and like you can have these shared resources, and tends to work. When you have bad democratic institutions, like unfortunately where the United States is now, and other countries, when you start doing that, instead of it being like sharing the prosperity, it's actually about centralizing the power. And that's my worry here. Is I don't trust the Trump administration. Friggin, I, I can literally throw them further than I can trust him, and and he's a pretty big guy, so I doubt think I can throw him very far. Um, so yeah, you know, fit as a fiddle, just ask his doctor. But so I worry about that a little bit. And I think the industrialists here, like, I'm glad that, Vinod Khosla started to think about like the idea that as AI starts centralizing and removing, like, all the AI valuations are based primarily upon of destroying the American workforce. Like something like 1 out of 8 people or 1 out of 12 people in America will be put out of employment by AI if all the AI valuations come to pass. Like that just destroys the American workforce. And so like this is really just like a capitalist, like in a protection mode, right? Of like, how can I, because like if you're putting that many people out, like they're going to get the pitchforks out. Like, and they're going to come for Vinod Khosla first. So that's where I just kind of think about it. Like, I don't have like a concrete thought here other than like what we're doing right now ain't working.
Well, you're right. I hate it. I'll start with the government shouldn't own the means of production. And it ties in with what you said a minute ago. You don't trust the Trump administration. I don't trust the federal government. Full stop. I mean, that is in our DNA. I just started watching the Ken Burns, the American Revolution. It's like in our DNA from 1754, right? As an American patriot, I just think, these are our streets. The government exists to support the protection of our rights. They don't grant us shit. They certainly don't grant us the right to, it's not them granting us the right to walk down the street. It's my fucking street. So I don't want the government to own the means of production. I do think the counterpoint to that is, I think 100% we should have a social safety net. And that social safety net is healthcare, unemployment insurance, et cetera. I think it's, at the same time, asinine that we don't have some sort of federally supported healthcare system. It's a public good. We're going to take care of people. If you get hurt and you go to the hospital, we're going to take care of you. That's just a humane society. And like, if you just unpack that logic, there's just no way to logic or way out of that being privatized, that being some sort of, like, some people get it because they can afford it and some people don't because they can't. It's a public good. And I don't like when people say healthcare is a right, because, it's not literally a right, but that's me just being pedantic. Back to this point, I think it ties in with what you said at the start of the show, which is you have a desire to be outside doing shit, carrying shit, making stuff happen. And what went through my mind in part when you were talking about that is, what Scott Galloway talks a lot about is we've got a bunch of young men trapped in their basements on their screens. And like, that's what's in my mind when I hear UBI, Universal Basic Income. You get $1,000 a month to just sit in your basement and hide from society. And people need meaning, belonging, and purpose. And you don't get any of that if you're sitting in your basement on your screen playing a video game or whatever. And because you get $1,000 a month, I think there should be a safety net. Like, if you're out of work for a while, cool. But here's my big question mark. We've never been able to solve any kind of like work training program. When we shut down one industry, for example, we more or less shut down, consciously or unconsciously, shut down manufacturing in America. Now, shutdowns. We decreased manufacturing in America, and we said we were going to do a bunch of job retraining and did fuck all to do that. To actually do that, or if we did do it, it didn't work. So I think there's an element of this that, sure, should we try to figure out how to get people from doing their menial office work that's going to be done by AI into whatever is next? Yes. But that's where I have the most questions. I think I sort of reject that we should just pay people, though.
Okay. I mean, I can appreciate that position. I guess what I would say, I think, like, first of all, it's a false framing to say that we shut down manufacturing. I actually think it's actually a really close analog. You know what the number 2 manufacturing country in the world is?
It's us. I know. You told me that before. I believe you.
And why? Why are we the number 2, even though we don't have that many manufacturing jobs?
I mean, I don't know.
Automation. I mean, like, that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? We didn't shut down the industry. It just became centralized and capitalized, right? Which is, it became less, we decreased the power of the worker because the worker was no longer essential to the system. And we exported a lot of, like, the menial, like, low, relatively low skill, low education at a minimum jobs to places overseas where it could be done cheaper. So we didn't shut down manufacturing. We just didn't capture as much of the menial work that was building up because we automated and made a lot more manual. And so I think that's actually a pretty good parallel to where AI is going to be taking a lot of what was considered more white collar work. But that was, so, and your point there is like the job re-education sort of stuff. Like, we've not put a whole lot of money behind it. So I don't know what to do with that. I would say that I don't think in places where there are stronger social safety nets, that means that like those people are spending more time in their basement. Right? So like, um, or where, like why do I get free high school, but I have to pay for college? Right. So like there are some things that are maybe all the between like a full UBI, but where we could really strengthen those like strong those social safety nets, where we can accelerate and get people into the workforce and let to a certain extent, like the real genius of capitalism is not on the capital side of things. It's about like the freedom of independent decision making, and a lot of little micro decisions kind of collectively add up to a more holistic and efficient whole. Right. And that's why centralized planning tends to not work very well because, centralized planning just it's why I built my company the way I am is I really try to decentralize decision making as much as possible. It's why the US military does that. Like we empower the NCO to make the decision, on the ground while they're doing the thing because decentralized decision making tends to be more efficient and more effective. Right. And so like as I'm talking about it here, I think more about like, can we strengthen the social safety net, give people the ability to go choose whatever the hell they want to go do, make their own decision about it and from a kind of a freedom construct about that, and then give them enough money for them to be able to go do that thing. Let them make the decision. Because I don't, to your point, I don't think humans find a whole lot of meaning in sitting in their basement, but they also don't find a whole lot of meaning in menial jobs either. It's not like the person that's doing data entry loves that. Like it's not the most meaningful work, right? So I think that there's a component of that. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
well, but there's more. This is probably not super relevant to your point. I think, but just to make a distinction there, like it's not just do they love making widgets? No, but they have some sense that they're self sufficient. There's pride in knowing that you supported yourself. I think it gets even harder when somebody just hands you a paycheck and you don't have to do anything for it. Like, where's your pride, man? I don't know.
yeah. I don't know. I do. There are people that like enjoy living on the government dole. I just don't know the people that I've met and that are working and that are kind of at like the lower rungs of human society, American society. They don't tend to want to hang out there, in my opinion. Like that's a consequence of circumstances to a certain extent. And so I think that's kind of like one of the core issues we have to deal with here. Either way, if we're going to share the prosperity to a certain extent, and we're going to have that bigger social safety net, it can either be through ownership of companies, like that, or it can be through massively much higher taxes. And we're going to have to figure out a way to help share the wealth a little bit. Um, And until we figure out how to do that, like we are making the system more and more fragile and much, much more likely that, people start getting out pitchforks when this starts, massively disrupting the labor market. Or the flip of that is we're rooting against American wealth and we hope that the AI companies that are building all this value fail because they won't be disrupting the labor markets as much. Like built into their valuations is they are going to massively disrupt American labor markets. So we either have to root against AI companies, which we should want to do from an American, patriotism sort of standpoint and like, generation of the future. Like I'd rather us be in control of that, or we need to be figuring out a way to like share the wealth a little bit more, because you cut 1/10 of the American, labor market off. You go to that's unemployment that we haven't really like seen in any substantial way in our entire lifetimes. Like we're starting to talk about like depression era levels of unemployment, and that will far exceed any sort of social safety net that's built in the United States right now.
Yeah, I put that in the military, like most dangerous course of action kind of thing. For those that are unfamiliar, there's sort of when you brief a mission, you talk about what the enemy is most likely to do and what's most dangerous that they do. I put that in the big extreme case. I have lived long enough to know that things don't turn out as bad or as good usually as predicted. I think in this one, I think it's a little overhyped. And I look at the tools today. There's a lot more. like I can build an agent that can do some of the menial tasks for me. Most of those menial tasks, though, are tied to the digital world. And what I mean by that is like you can have an agent create a bunch of social media posts for you, and you can just go click, click, click. Yes, 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 yes. You can have an agent write responses to all your emails now, and that you just go yes, 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 yes. You could just fully automate that. I choose right now because most of them it's like edit, send, edit, send. Fine, like that's making me more efficient. But now we're into the world of like, how do you get AI to be as impactful in the physical world? I think, look, in the near term, you can imagine an Amazon warehouse being pretty dramatically different. But there's a lot of other stuff in the world that is much harder to imagine. And so here's where I am right now is that AI is going to dramatically change the digital world, social media, news, all of that. Much less so the further away you get from digital. And in particular, I think here's where I'm like, I'm much less bullish. I think that this is more like a society moving away from manufacturing into a service industry based economy, which the US is almost, what are we, like 60-70% service based already? We just get more service based. So is it a shift? Yes. Is it depression? I'm not ready to say depression era. Well, it's not yet.
Uh, I don't think we're driving that direction. I think that the AI bubble is overhyped. I actually think the valuations are over to the top. But that said, most of the recent earnings reports, they were kind of hitting their numbers and then some. So they're on track. Uh, my wife is a doctor. That's a service industry. She takes care of people, right? Um, her job I think, is at great risk for AI, right? So when I was stationed in Italy, one of the things that she would do so doctors have been feeling a lot of pressure, specifically in certain industries like radiology or parts of the industry of like radiology, et cetera, for outsourcing. And so when I was stationed in Italy, it was, she was certified, she was, licensed and boarded in the United States, but not like to work in Italy. It just didn't make sense for her to work there. So she ended up taking a job where she drove a robot around two rural hospitals in Northern California and was a robo doctor. These are rural hospitals that have a hard time getting doctors at night, and to cover that, and so it was robo doctor or no doctor was kind of one of the options that they had there, or doctors that probably shouldn't be doctors anymore, right? So like they can't get jobs elsewhere. And so Robo Doctor was the best experience, and it was great for our family because she was able to work while we were in Italy. She covered the night shift in California, but it was it was relatively early morning to early afternoon Italian time. So that worked out really, really well. But like there was a little bit of like this thing to me of like, okay, I can see where there's some pressures on your job a little bit now. So when she goes out and she visits a patient, it's like when she was doing that with the Robo Doctor, there was a nurse that would go around and actually do the things that required hands, right? Put the stethoscope, around the various parts of the body in order to listen to the internal sounds. There was a camera that was good enough for you to be able to kind of like check some basic ocular movement, but the nurse was a little specially trained. So that doesn't have to be done by a doctor. Um, and moreover, like when I look at like what it took to train my wife, it took her 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and 3 years of residency. So an 11-year post high school training track. Um, and every decade she has to get reboarded, which means that she has to sit down for a day-long test to make sure that she's staying current on current medical practices. And every year she has to turn in a certain amount of like professional education credits to make sure that she's staying up to date in order to maintain her existing boarded. And she's a human being. She's the best human being I know, but she's a human being. And so she's an incredibly thoughtful and passionate about patient care, really studies about it. Like, but at the end of the day, she can only read so many journal articles. And she's only checked on to make sure that like she's actually staying up with the state of the art about once a decade. And by the time they publish that test, it's already, latent, right? It's already months late. And so, what could you do if you had AI that was connected to every medical paper ever written, and where had, a specially trained nurse or some other professional that is doing the data entry and AI does the read of it, right? Like my wife is not paid for her hands; she's paid for what's between her ears, and she just mostly walks from room to room. And that job will not exist in its current form in the very near future, right? Like the only thing saving us from that is the same reason that we have two pilots in commercial airliners is because people are uncomfortable in not having a human up in the cockpit, right? But like we've had the technology for a long time, at least to get rid of one of them, if not both of them, up there. People just don't want to do it because it makes them uncomfortable, right? So it's the same sort of thing. But like if you, so AI will displace my wife's job eventually, and I don't think that eventually is as far out as people would estimate. So
Yeah. My counter to that is pilots aren't up there to fly it. I mean, 98% of the time, you don't need a pilot, to your point. It's when things go wrong and the sort of independent thought machine that a human being is that's when it's important. Uh, I think on a doctor level, I mean, you know this space way more than me, but I think it's a matter of degrees. I don't disagree with your point, but I think it's going to be quite a long time before you really truly remove the interpretation of what that AI is telling us. I don't know if it's a couple of decades or more, but my estimate is that this is not like 2 years from now. You can just, uh, I asked, was it ChatGPT a question this morning, and it just fully made up an answer. Like I asked it a question that I knew half of it. It just made shit up. So like, I'm not saying they're not going to figure that out. But this goes back to like, it's never as good or as bad as you think it's going to be. I think, especially with something like medical care, I'm going to want a human in the loop. Even if it's like interpreting or overseeing, maybe the labor goes down, but it doesn't go to zero.
yeah, so I think it won't go. It's not like a light switch where we're going to be like, no doctors, thanks.
Yeah. Good luck. We're all counting on you.
But it is going to be something that starts moving more and more towards automation, right? Which is kind of the industrial capacity. And we're just going to have a lot fewer people that are doing it. And it will be in degrees there. And like, just like we saw the disruption of, what happened to the Rust Belt as, people were not given, a pathway towards, career success. Like, and it's fucking been disastrous for our politics and poisonous to kind of the society as large. Like, it has spillover effects to how we are voting about like treating immigrants. Like, all these things are attached to the fact that like industrial as we've removed humans from this, there's some there's some problems that happen there. And, you know, we're starting to talk about like actually the jobs that can be most automated are the most white, the most professional in a lot of you know, and so now you're starting to talk about not only like undercutting like the lower classes, but like the folks that are like in right now have a pretty good ticket to like the middle and upper middle class, right? So like what does that do? And so I don't know if I'm totally sold on a universal basic income, but I do think we need to have a much broader social safety net and more. I wouldn't even call it a net because it's like I think there just needs to be other pathways. Like there needs to be more. Like, I think college should be free. I think if you want to go to a public university anywhere in the United States, like, and you have a reasonable thing that you're working on, you should be able to go for free. I don't know why high school is free, but college isn't, right? And especially in a society that's going to require more intellectual development. Trade schools, I think, should be free. Like, I think all those things should be free and give people the power to go choose what's best for them. But like, so I don't know if I would call that a safety net as much as like more paths for people to kind of explore and do what they need to do. Um, so that's kind of where my head goes.
Hey, I heard somebody borrowed your flag slogan.
Well, it came from the Navy. Um, so those of you that are not watching on video and haven't heard me talk about it for a while, behind me is a flag that says "Don't give up the ship." It was first flown from the masthead of a ship in the War of 1812, and it was associated with the words of a dying captain of his ship, which is to not give up the fight, don't give up the ship, and it kind of became like almost like a Remember the Alamo sort of a rallying cry for the U.S. Navy during the the War of 1812. So, so yeah, don't give up the ship, man. Like it's been, I actually have another flag, the exact same flag flying out front of my house, and it's been there for months now.
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
And I think it's something to say about like, maybe a little Thomas Paine here, which is, these are the times that try men's souls. What is it? The Sunshine Soldier? No, the Sunshine Soldier and the Summer Patriot. Like we need to be. It's easy to be patriotic when everything's going aces, right? But like it's hard to be patriotic when like things are kind of rocking this country to its constitutional core right now in a lot of big ways. So, yeah, don't give up the ship, man. And most particularly here recently became relatively famous. Elise Slotkin was talking about it. You may have heard about
Mark
this.
Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Mark Kelly is he spent his whole career in public service, was an astronaut, but before that he was a naval aviator. A couple other naval aviators in there. So like, I come from, good stock, I guess here. But the idea is that we all have a duty to this country, especially if you ever swore an oath. That duty never really goes away. It's not an end date. And that's not a trite and silly thing for us to be like kind of bandying about. And that oath was to the Constitution. And there's some big, like we are well past the point of constitutional crisis. Like most of the country just doesn't give a fuck. And if you swore an oath to the Constitution, you need to stand up for it, in uniform and out. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think so just to summarize for the audience, that a group of lawmakers made a video that essentially said, like, if you're in the Uniformed Armed Services, the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is, you're subject to the law as an American, but the UCMJ, when you sign up to be in the military, you also sign up to obey the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And what it says is you are not obligated to follow an illegal order, meaning like if somebody asks you to do something illegal, you have the right and responsibility not to do it. And that's contrary to what most people think about the military. They're like, oh, well, you just follow orders blindly. And the answer is, well, fuck no, we don't. We follow lawful orders. So what I find most important about this is that this is a conversation we've had amongst the officer corps in the military for a long time. Like I probably had this conversation 100 times, especially going to Iraq and doing all of that. What's really interesting is that now this is spilled out into the open public, and it's really been entertaining to watch others, not military folks, have like come to grips with this. It's always been true for the folks who made that video, like Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin. You're like, well, yeah, dummies. Like, of course, this is just like obvious. But to watch even news anchors sort of wrestle with it has been quite entertaining. Anyway, they just stated the UCMJ as a matter of fact, and they got essentially a bunch of blowback from not only the president, but a bunch of people. I just, I would encourage everybody to just go read the words. They're pretty black and white.
Yeah. It's worth kind of pointing out like where this is, it's not only that you have the right to refuse an illegal order, it's you actually have a duty. You have a legal responsibility to disobey that. And I think one of the things we haven't talked about enough in kind of the officer corps is about like how fucking murky and muddy that's going to feel when at the time, right? Because there's going to be people that are giving those orders that think they're 100% justified, and they're going to be the ones in power. And you're going to be in a place where you're going to have to stand out alone. And potentially even worse than being killed in combat as a social species is social isolation, right? Like standing up for what you believe in is tough. It's really fucking tough. And you're going to have to do that. When Hugh Thompson, so if you're not familiar with him, he was the helicopter pilot that prevented my life from continuing, which is potentially like one of the worst cases of abuse during the Vietnam War, where a bunch of American servicemen were in there like raping and murdering people, and they were there under orders. And he put his helicopter gunship in between the civilians that were ostensibly the enemy and these American, I think they were soldiers, and said, fire on Americans if they come after these people anymore. And that was like, that takes a degree of moral courage to be willing to like shoot other Americans and order the shooting of other Americans because of that. It wrecked his career, right? And it was a difficult and hard spot. And you know what? America was better for it. It served the United States better in the long term. It definitely, helped save lives. Like it's all goodness in the long term, but it wasn't for Hugh. It was a difficult thing to do. And so I don't think in the officer corps, we really internalized like, hey, if you're willing to give up your life for your country, you also need to be willing to give up your social status. You need to be able to give up your career. And I don't think we've really internalized that enough. I was talking about that in the Naval Academy, and this is not as much an illegal order there as much as like, the conflicting loyalties of like to the institution and how I was really upset with the superintendent for not standing up for it a little bit more. So that's like on the one end of the spectrum. Like this is the relatively easy thing. She could retire. She's like, there's very little risk to her from a career perspective, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is like these hardcore illegal orders, kind of a Hugh Thompson sort of scenario. And the reason that these senators and Congress people put this together is because illegal orders are happening right now. We are engaged with some at best very legally questionable constraints around the posse comitatus and putting Marines in Los Angeles, for example. But we are also engaged in explicitly illegal behavior in the Caribbean. And U.S. Southcom is the combatant commander or component combatant commander that is responsible for that. The 4-star admiral that was in charge of that command, Alvin Halsey, he resigned. Right? He resigned because he was not going to be party to doing a legal order. He did the right thing. Now, his resignation came with a retirement. There was very few penalties associated with that. But everybody in the chain of command from him down to the trigger puller right now is also complicit in illegal murder. It's murder is what the U.S. government is engaged in right now. And those people are executing murder. It's illegal on multiple fronts. And it's worth noting that everybody that's having to think about that and have to internalize that, and like we're in the officer corps, there's going to be people in power that are going to say, no, it's legal. I think the worst example of this is actually a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, who, after he left the service, he ended up becoming a defense attorney. He worked for defending Eddie Gallagher, the SEAL that had committed war crimes. Ended up getting him off of most of those. So that's our system of justice, but didn't get him off for one of them, which was posing with a dead body. Really kind of like the minimal sort of standard associated with that. So this guy, the lawyer, his name is Tim Parlatore. He ended up trying the chain of command effectively in public and getting a political pardon from Trump during the first Trump administration in order to do that. Eddie Gallagher since has been like on podcasts and effectively admitted that like all the things that Parlatore got him off for, he actually kind of did and was like didn't regret it. So there was a component associated with that. Well, Tim now is the personal defense attorney for the Secretary of War / Defense, Pete Hegseth. So helped defend him in some of his cases. He ended up giving Tim a commission in the Navy Reserve. So Tim is doing that, and he's still like doing these social media appearances where he's kind of talking about like how the people that are talking about illegal orders and like if they're out there like having to do their thing and like it's just all a smokescreen. And like it's worth knowing that if you're engaged in illegal orders, there's going to be lawyers like Tim that are really smart at creating legal justifications for absolute horseshit. And that's what's happening. So you're going to have to like get comfortable with the fact that you've got a lot of the power working against you, and you're going to be out there alone. But just know that your country depends on you, and I personally depend on you. And what little I can do, or I think I can speak for you, Neal, is that if you're standing up against legal orders, there are people out there that will support you.
Yeah, for sure. I want to highlight two key things that are, I think, worth noting. One is that the oath we take is not to obey a person, but to support the Constitution. Sort of, I think, most of us know at least a few people. I carried the pocket Constitution with me for a long time. I think it was a reminder to me at the time that that's the loyalty. Two, maybe a nuance here, but nowhere in my oath did it say that I'll obey the orders of the president, but the NCO oath does. The enlistment oath says, not only will I support and defend the Constitution, but I will obey the orders of the president and the officer appointed over me. Officers specifically do not say that in their oath. So maybe a nuance, but probably worth noting. I think the other thing I'll say to support your point is that the hardest thing here is going to be when people disagree about what's illegal and what legal or illegal. And I think some of this will come down to judgment, and you will have lawyers telling you, like I did in Iraq, I had lawyers helping me understand law of war, helping me interpret the written word to understand what was legal. I mean, I'm not a legal expert. I have, that's what we have lawyers for. But just like in business, lawyers are advisors. I have to remind my team of this all the time. The lawyer said no. Like, lawyers can't say no. That's not how this works. The business leader, the person who's in charge, gets to say yes or no. The lawyer gets to help you interpret so you can make the decision. And this is also true in these scenarios. But I do think it's hairy already, and it's going to keep getting worse so long as this administration keeps pushing the bounds of the president's response was either just full on ignorant of what these statements mean, and he's probably just trolling, and I should probably just take a deep breath, and he's really good at trolling, but it doesn't change the seriousness and severity of it. And it called for the death of sitting lawmakers for reading the UCMJ out loud.
Yep.
Wow.
I mean, I'll tell you the one thing I'm actually really excited about in this, which is that for too long it's been the hashtag resistance, right? And it's been people wearing knitted hats and marching, in comfortably democratic cities where they're not doing much, right? And you support it. And I don't want to minimize that, right? But also we need fucking a lot more than that. We need a lot more than token resistance. We need actual people to stand up for duty. And I am really glad to see 6 Democrats, and they don't have to be Democrats, but they just happen to be 6 Democrats in this particular case. But all of them, ex-servicemen and women, or involved in national security, people that have taken an oath, standing up and saying, no, not anymore. We're done. This stops. That needed to happen fucking years ago. People were one of the things I think about Jim Mattis's resignation in Trump 1.0 as the Secretary of Defense is he resigned because he could not get on board with what Trump was doing. But he soft pedaled why he resigned and said, the president deserves that. No, the president does not deserve to have somebody that is willing to do what he wants. The president is constrained by the Constitution, and so are you as Secretary of Defense. And if you're going to resign because that's the last option available to you, you need to speak very publicly about why you're resigning and not soft pedal it at all. And so I think clear, unadulterated language from leaders in the government, whether they're politicians or people that are have other offices that they have to hold, it's time. Stand up. Say it in plain language. This is not acceptable. This is unconstitutional. It's illegal. I'm not going to be party to this, and I'm going to stop you, and you're going to have to either fucking fire me out of this, or if you want to be like the 2-bit dictator that you want to be, and threaten my life, go on. I'm not afraid of you, you fucking jackass. Like, go ahead, say whatever you want.
Well, I mean, look, we're just follow the law. Like, I get the gray area that I mentioned before. Like, there are going to be people that disagree about what's legal and illegal. But if you're following the law, you're you have you're gonna have a lot of folks on your side.
Yeah, here. Well, I think we're to the point here where we talk about goods, bads, and others. You want to tell me about what's going good in the land of Neal?
Yeah. Well, so my dad is a big USC fan. I mean, one, I'm a college football fan. My dad, in particular, is the USC. That's University of Southern California. You South Carolina people. Uh, Gone to games for a long time. Is what he did in his retirement. He didn't really go to a lot of games when I was growing up, but he really liked going to those games. He's 86 now. He decided a couple of years ago he just couldn't make the trek. It's an hour plus drive up to LA, etc. But I figured out a way. I went and did a bunch of research to figure out, what he couldn't do was the long walk because he's walking with a cane now and whatever. So I figured out a way to get him dropped off closer to the seats. And like, there's a special entrance for people like him that can, so we're going to go this weekend to the biggest game of the year is always USC, UCLA. And he's excited. And that's just a good where I can get my dad into, do something that he really enjoys. And,
They have a lot more than I think most people really estimate for actually getting people of limited mobility or other handicaps in order to be able to enjoy sports. We did that with my grandmother. Actually, I took her to one of my
nice.
One of my final memories with her was actually taking her to an Orioles game. And then like we had the special drop off and they had the special seats. I took her to an Army Navy game as well, and you had to be careful with the mobility stuff. But like in that Orioles game, like she was there and so was my baby son. Right. And so like there was kind of this cool like family moment centered around sports, and like all the sports teams want you there. Right. Like I know like here in Denver, like Coors Field, like there's a whole row all the way around the entire stadium of nothing, 2 rows of nothing but handicap seating for people with wheelchairs. Right. So like they want you there. So they'll figure out a way to get you. Whether it's they even have carts, they'll shuttle you around if you need to.
Well, I don't think he's going to get there. Well, let's see what he agrees to. And he's one of our loyal listeners. So Dad, we'll figure this out together.
I think if he has the fun of watching USC beat UCLA this weekend, I think that'll help to motivate him to like, even if it was difficult. Yeah.
That's right. My bad this week is, look, we are building. I said that recently. Heirloom is, in the midst of building our pilot site. And, as I kind of knew was going to happen, we came in contact with the real world, and it's windy in Wyoming, which means that we got
great site to build a wind turbine.
I mean, it's why we're there. But yeah, you can't be up in a bucket truck when the wind is howling at 25 miles an hour. So we've been delayed, and that's a bummer because we've gotten much slower progress out of that. The team that's out there just waiting for the wind to die down, and now we're probably we were, I don't know, a month behind. We're now a couple more weeks behind than that, and so anyway, we're dealing with that. We're rolling with the punches, and we went through a whole troubleshooting. Like, what could we do differently? Could we like go at night? Could we try a different kind of bucket truck? Could I buy my way out of this? And Mother Nature. It's sort of like I tell my boys at the ocean: never turn your back on the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mother Nature's going to win.
It's interesting. Again, this is why you do pilots, though, right? Which is you start understanding the constraints of what you're doing here, and like why before you scale this, like what you need to be doing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you have different processes. There's some different things that you design in future iterations of this, because you're like, man, I don't want a guy in a truck fucking putting that up. Like that's the weak point here, right? So like design away from the bucket truck. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're having to deal with those challenges, but I have confidence under your able leadership that it will only make Heirloom better.
I sure hope so. And my other this week is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, she has been the boogeyman. She really, I mean, like this is proof that I am in a bubble because she has been the boogeyman for a long time. And then recently, because of her positions on the Epstein files and some other stuff, I like got to see her interviewed, and like she's so much more reasonable than I ever gave her credit. Now, she's said some wild stuff in the past. You can't erase history, but I just want to point out that, that even the boogeyman in my world isn't quite as bad as I had imagined. She's going to end up resigning over it, or she did resign over it and all of that. I just want to acknowledge that, one, we all have to remember that we're in bubbles, and two, she, for whatever reason, came to a more sort of center point of view, standing up for, things that we can all get behind, the defending the victims in the Epstein case, for example. But the reason this is my other is from I have my popcorn. I'm just like watching what's going to happen next. Cause the saga isn't over. Like, is she going to run for Senate in Georgia? Is she going to fully switch? Is she going to go independent? Is she just going to go get a TV show? And also, like, how extreme is she going to be now moving forward? She was always the voice of the most extreme MAGA wing. And, I've just been calling, as I've done on this show, I just want everybody to come back to the middle, man. Come on. She's now in that middle. I want to see if she's going to stay there.
I don't know if it's totally fair to say you were in a bubble. Like, I think you're actually judging her on her actions. Her stuff was pretty fucking bananas in a lot of ways. Like, I'm sure if you had a nice conversation with practically anybody in Congress, you'd be like, well, they're not that bad. But like, again, it's like, what are their actual actions? And like, they're in a position of political leadership. They have duties. A part of it, like, is how they show up in public. And she was.
Yeah.
But she has definitely stood up for the right thing here recently a couple of times. Even here in Colorado, Lauren Boebert got called for a one-on-one for Trump to like lean on her to prevent the Epstein stuff from coming out. And Lauren Boebert's a hot mess of a political operative, but to her credit too, she stood up and said, no, I'm gonna put this out.
Well, and Marjorie Taylor Greene also came out for the subsidies, like not giving Obamacare subsidies, not letting Obamacare subsidies expire because people's healthcare costs are going to massively increase. What is it? Double, triple? I mean, it's like massive increases. And she's like, no, let's not. Like, anyway, I just think she's come out on a couple of things that were much more reasonable, not so partisan, I guess, right? It's like, rather than just holding the party line, she came to like think for herself, and it was just a breath of fresh air. I applaud it. I don't understand it, but I applaud it. And as I say, I'm sort of anxiously awaiting what she does next.
I think she's going to run for president. I think that there's a component here where there's a post-Trump who owns MAGA sort of thing, and MAGA was always a populist movement. And Trump, when he governs such as it is, it doesn't operate very much like a populist. He tends to be really connected to the wealthy. And so like this component of being like a white Southerner that is, embracing like the populism side of things, which is, like at its core, Epstein is about like the fact that the wealthy and the well-connected had a different set of rules than all the rest of us. Right. And so I think this is her laying claim to that future. Trump is an old man. Hopefully we figured out the constitutional crises before he runs for a third term in 2028. But there's going to be somebody that runs against him. JD Vance has not shown enough of a backbone. So I think that she's found a lane to run in, and I think she's going to spend the next couple of years doing that. And she resigned. Yeah, and she resigned before she actually had to like really butt heads with the guy. So she can, she had enough of a kind of an apology tour to moderate her position so people don't like, dislike her so much. I think she's run for president. For me, my goods, we already talked about just working outside, man. Um, my wife wants me to kind of redo our backyard. And my kids are old enough now that I get to do this with them. So when I was a kid, I built a house with my dad, a cabin over 3 different summers, and like I think that gave me a lot of skills, also kind of a view of the world. We talked a little bit about like how children broadly kind of working alongside a parent really helps. Like I like cooking with my daughter. She loves cooking, which is why I bring it up, not to gender it, but just because that's something she really enjoys. But working alongside a child helps them to really understand about like what needs to happen there. But I think in particular for my son, like doing manual labor outdoors really is good for his mental health and for his understanding where he fits into the world. So I'm enjoying that, and I'm enjoying them learning new skills. The resiliency of my daughter as she was moving that shovel, full of dirt. Um, she was tired by the end of the day. She was working hard, so I was really proud of her. Um, so that's my good. Um, my bad is COP. So those not in the climate space, there's an annual conference every year where all the governments to get together. This year was the 30th version of that. It's happened every year except for in the pandemic, so it's been happening for 31 years. Some really big things happened in COPs. The Paris Climate Accords came out of COP 21. COP 26 was where we got the Glasgow Financial Alliance for net zero, which is really driving a lot of stuff outside of regulation. Not a whole lot happened at COP 30. This really illustrates that there was a fire there, so which is just like the perfect metaphor. So there's that. There is this component I think of the COPs where they've become a little too institutionalized, and so everybody goes because they say they have to be there. Same thing with like New York Climate Week, where it's like the professional climate people are there and like not as much is happening. And I think the biggest thing that I see, like the big thing that happened that allowed COP 21 to be successful was actually American leadership, not at the COPs per se, but leading up to it. And specifically, it was John Kerry, as Secretary of State, making a bilateral climate deal with the Chinese. And like people don't talk about it, totally kind of like behind the scenes sort of things. But once that broke the logjam that had prevented the previous 20 COPs from actually being successful, and it completely changed how we deal with climate in a good way. And so we're just seeing the lack of American leadership. American government actually, it's literally every government on the planet is there except for the American government this time. Literally every single one.
Yeah.
And so there's this opportunity for the United States to lead, and instead we're sitting on our thumbs.
So who led since the United States wasn't there?
Well, so it's a multilateral thing. So there's nobody that's actually leading, but it's more along the lines of like the necessary underpinnings and political agreements that kind of need to set it up for success happen before the COPs. And so,
sorry, it was a leading question. The New York Times had a big article on how China was the central. They did a lot of economic deals on the side because of the stuff we were talking about before. Like they got cheap solar panels, cheap this, cheap that, and the absence of U.S. leadership wasn't just a vacuum went unfilled.
yep, deal making is happening, and like the BRICS countries broadly are starting to really align. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But in particular, that is in this new bipolar world that we're creating that's under Chinese leadership. And the U.S. has just abdicated not only its responsibility, but its opportunities. So that sucks. And then my other is like the GOP on Epstein. So yeah, I don't know what to fucking think of this.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
There's a couple of like the Boberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and like Thomas Massey, I think is the other guy. Like good for them. Like they've been kind of standing up, for what is kind of the right thing here. I don't know totally why, but it's interesting. I'm interested to see kind of what comes out of this because they've effectively forced. so they couldn't get enough of a resolution for a discharge position for the government to go ahead and release all these files until they got one more congresswoman, a Democrat actually out of New Mexico, to get seated following the shutdown. Mike Johnson did as much as he could to prevent that from happening for as long as he could, but he physically couldn't do it anymore. As soon as she got in, they passed this resolution, including the three, congressmen and women that we were just referred to. And then it was expected to go to the Senate and kind of go through a thing. And then the Senate did a voice vote of it and passed it immediately, which I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. I was expecting the Senate GOP particularly, to kind of do a similar delay tactics. And then when it got to the president, for there to be like a veto. Something's happening here, right? Because they did the voice vote, and then Trump was like, "Oh yeah, we've always been for releasing the Epstein files. Duh, of course. We didn't call Lauren Boebert in and to strong arm her to prevent this. Blah blah blah." So I don't know what's happening. Something's happening under the surface here that I'm not privy to, and but something's happening. And I wonder if the GOP is finally starting to, at least members of it, to recognize it. Like they've strapped themselves to the mast of a sinking ship in the long term. And the sooner they cut themselves loose, the more legitimacy they'll have moving forward. At its core, Donald Trump is a lame duck president. And if they continue to make their party about the personality of one individual, like, he can't be president forever, if nothing more than just the fact that he's an 80-year-old man, right?
Yeah. I don't. I'm maybe more cynical about this than you. I'll just start with, I think there's something there only because Trump doesn't want it out. I don't think there's any other, like, there's a bunch of stuff that, like, this, you're on this side, you're on that side, whatever. But like, the only thing that makes me think there's something in there is that he really would not have taken all that political flack if there wasn't really something he wanted to hide. The other cynical part is like, or I guess the cynical part is, I think they've just figured out another way to prevent the shit from coming out. Like, they're going to heavily redact it. They're, we did a whole show on conspiracy theories. This is the one where I'm like, I'm full QAnon at this point. Like, he clearly didn't want this out. Do we really think that Epstein committed suicide? I don't know. I just, like, all of that to me is, there's too much there for it to not really feel a lot like a real conspiracy. And I keep trying to remind myself that this stuff always comes to light eventually. Like, go back to Nixon, or go back to Iran-Contra, or like, the good part of our government is that it's really hard to hide shit forever. You can hide it for a while, but it'll eventually come out, even if it's redacted, etc. But man, I just, I guess my point is, in response to your other here, is like, I much less believe that people have found a conscience, as there are some just realities here on that this is coming out one way or the other. But I'm with you. I'm with you on it could be dramatic, and therefore, let's not be distracted.
Yeah. I mean, like, at the end of the day, we don't need anything being released to know that, like, the guy is probably a kitty fucker, right? Like, there's been too many times of him, like, being accused of sexual assault, him bragging about walking into the dressing room of the Miss Teen USA pageant, like, all sorts of stuff. Like, and even if you don't, like, think he's a kitty fucker, like, he's done enough to, like, we know he's a grade A scumbag.
Who knows? That's not my impression of what I've seen. What I've seen is that he's clearly, like, been convicted of, what is the E. Jean Carroll thing, where it was sexual assault. I don't know. I have not seen evidence that he is interested in kids. Like, but maybe that's what's in the Epstein file.
I mean,
right?
maybe, but
he seems like
he's the most, like something of the emails that were released by the Epstein estate, like, he was like in 75% of them or something. Right? The guy was like, he was personal buddies. Like, he knows all this. He was hanging out with him after he became, like, a convicted pedophile, or convicted sex trafficker. Like, And even if you ignore all of that, Trump himself bragged about how he used to walk in on the into the dressing room of the Miss Teen USA. Like, that's not a guy that has like a clear moral line of like, respecting the privacy of teenagers. Like, he's the kind of guy that gets off on that.
Well, this goes back to we've got a bunch of maybe like all of that evidence points to, I would say, circumstantial, and like you could paint a story that that's true. To me, the strongest evidence again is that he doesn't want it out. So like, that's what's got my attention. If he had handled it any other way, I'd be like, oh, it's probably a nothing burger. Maybe they made a big deal out of it, but it's probably just going to roll over. I mean, if he survived the Access Hollywood tape, I mean, what could he be afraid of? But he's clearly afraid of this. So
Yeah. I mean, the Eugene Carroll, it was sexual assault, and we're not talking like slapping a butt. Like, he like violated her in a dressing room, and he was convicted of it. Right? Like, we know this much about him. He brags about looking at young women that are actually young girls. Right? They're not 18. He is convicted of sexual assault. Like, we don't. There's not a whole lot of like missing pieces here on this. I actually kind of wonder sometimes if like if the Epstein stuff is like, if he's into something like really fucking freaky sexually, like, maybe like getting pegged or something. I don't know, but like, what sort of thing, like, really, like, his ego is absolutely the most important thing to him, and like, like, what would be the most emasculating thing that would destroy his ego that's preventing him from doing this?
yeah, but if that was, this is where I come back. If that was true, how is that not already out? People are really bad at keeping secrets. I'm actually kind of surprised we don't already know everything there's to know about this. And this is, I guess, this gets into a deeper thing. Maybe we tee it up for another time. But like, I've had this conversation with a bunch of buddies who are more like, have followed more extreme, conspiracy theories and all of that. And I keep coming back to like, secrets are really hard to keep at that level. So, maybe, but let's see.
Well, that's where we're at. Anyways, that's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, as always, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, please share us wherever you can on social media or elsewhere. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is brought to you by the Valor Media Network, and we'll see you next time.